Sell your truck? For a stranger, the laughter didn't just echo. It lingered, sharp and careless, bouncing off the oil-stained walls of the garage as Ethan Cole stood frozen with the keys in his hand, his knuckles pale, his breath slow, like a man weighing something no one else could see. 3 men leaned against tool benches, shaking their heads, one of them chuckling under his breath. Man, you can barely pay rent, and now you're playing hero? Ethan didn't answer, not because he didn't hear them, but because across the street, through the open garage door, something else was happening, something quieter but heavier. A woman in a light gray coat had stumbled near the edge of the parking lot, one hand gripping her side, the other reaching for balance that wasn't there, and then she sank down, slowly, like gravity had finally made its decision. Cars passed. Footsteps slowed, then continued. No one stopped. Not really. Not fully, just glances, quick and distant, the kind that keep people comfortable. You serious right now? Another voice pressed, louder this time, trying to pull Ethan back into their world, into logic, into numbers, bills, gas, food, medicine, the things that made sense. But Ethan's eyes didn't move. They stayed locked on the woman now sitting on cold pavement, shoulders trembling, breath uneven, and something inside him shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make the rest of the noise fade. He stepped forward, slow at first, then with purpose, each step carrying weight, not of confidence, but of decision, the kind that doesn't announce itself, it just happens. Behind him, laughter softened into confusion, then into silence as the garage door creaked lightly in the wind, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the cracked concrete. Hey, you okay? Ethan's voice was low, steady, careful not to startle. The woman looked up, eyes tired, surprised, like she wasn't expecting anyone to stop. I'm fine, she whispered, but her hand tightened against her side, and even without words, the truth was clear. Ethan glanced back once, just once, at the truck parked inside, the last thing he had that still felt like stability, like memory, like something his daughter recognized as normal. Then he looked forward again, back at the woman, and in that quiet space between breath and choice, something settled inside him, not doubt, not fear, something simpler, something older. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of distant traffic. A loose sign clinked softly against metal, and Ethan exhaled slowly, like he already knew what came next, even if it cost him everything. And somewhere behind him, the laughter never came back, only a silence that didn't understand yet what it had just witnessed. We need to get you inside before the cold makes it worse, Ethan said quietly, his voice steady even as his mind raced through numbers he could not afford. The woman tried to stand, but her knees faltered, and he caught her gently. Not strong, not dramatic, just enough to keep her from falling again. I am okay, she insisted, but her breath came uneven, her hand still pressed to her side, as if holding something fragile together. Ethan shook his head slightly, not arguing, just deciding. There is a clinic 2 blocks down, he said, already guiding her toward his truck parked across the street. The same truck he had fixed with his own hands, the same truck his daughter Lily called their little miracle. And for a moment he paused at the driver's door, keys in hand, feeling the weight of everything it represented. Then he opened it without another thought. Inside the cab, the air smelled faintly of motor oil and pine from an old air freshener swinging gently. The woman settled into the seat, her eyes closing briefly as if the act of sitting down had taken more strength than she wanted to admit. Ethan started the engine, the familiar rumble filling the silence, and drove slowly, carefully, every turn deliberate, every second stretching longer than it should. You do not have to do this, she whispered after a moment, her voice softer now, almost distant. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. Yeah, I do, he replied, not loudly, not heroically, just simply, like it was the only answer that made sense. The clinic doors slid open with a soft mechanical hum, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as he helped her inside. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and quiet worry. A receptionist looked up, her expression shifting from routine to concern as she noticed the woman's condition. Questions followed. Forms, insurance, things that lived in a world Ethan rarely felt welcome in. And when the number came back, the estimate, the cost of immediate care, It landed heavy, heavier than any tool he had ever lifted. The kind of number that did not just ask for money. It asked for sacrifice. Ethan stood there for a long second, the paper in his hand, the sounds around him fading into a low hum, the ticking clock on the wall suddenly louder than it should be. He thought of Lily at home, her small cough in the night, the way she smiled even when things were tight, the way she believed everything would somehow be okay because he was there. And then he thought of the woman beside him, alone, struggling, unseen by everyone else. "Sir?" The receptionist prompted gently, bringing him back. Ethan looked down at the keys in his palm, worn edges, familiar weight, and something inside him settled again. The same quiet certainty from before. He placed the keys on the counter slowly, not as a gesture, not for attention, just as a choice. "Will this cover it?" he asked, his voice calm, almost too calm. The receptionist blinked, surprised, unsure, and for a moment the entire room seemed to hold its breath, not understanding yet what had just been offered, not realizing that in that small, quiet action, a man had just given away the last piece of his stability without asking for anything in return. "You are really giving up your truck?" the receptionist asked softly, her voice careful now, no longer routine, no longer distant. Ethan nodded once, not looking at her, just at the keys resting on the counter like they already belonged to someone else. "If it covers what she needs, then yes," he said, simple, steady, and final. The room shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just a subtle change in the air as the weight of his decision settled into the space between them. The woman on the chair nearby watched him now, eyes clearer than before, confusion mixed with something deeper, something she had not expected to feel from a stranger. "You do not even know me," she said quietly, her voice no longer weak, but searching. Ethan finally glanced her way, just for a moment. "I know enough," he replied, then looked back at the counter, not waiting for recognition, not asking for gratitude. Paperwork moved, signatures followed, the quiet mechanics of a system that rarely paused for humanity now adjusting, slowly, carefully, to something it did not often see. The receptionist disappeared into the back, returning with a nod that carried both approval and disbelief. "We can begin treatment," she said, her tone softer now, almost respectful, as if she had witnessed something that did not fit into her usual day. Ethan exhaled, barely noticeable, a small release of tension that had been building since the moment he stepped out of the garage, and without another word, he stepped back, giving space, not lingering, not watching for outcomes, just stepping away from the center of something he had already decided was not about him. Outside, the late afternoon air felt cooler, sharper, the kind that settles into your bones when you are not moving fast enough. Ethan stood on the sidewalk for a second, empty hands where keys once rested, the distant hum of traffic filling the silence. He reached into his pocket out of habit, as if the keys might still be there, but they were not, and for a brief moment, reality pressed in, not regret, but consequence, the kind that does not shout. It just exists. He started walking, slow at first, then steady, each step carrying him farther from the life he had known just hours before. The pavement stretching ahead, uneven and familiar, yet different now without the comfort of an engine waiting behind him. People passed, some glancing, most not. The world continuing as it always does, unaware of the quiet exchanges that reshape it. As he turned onto his street, the sky had begun to fade into soft evening tones, a pale gold, slipping into gray, the windows of small houses catching the last light. And there, at the end of the walkway, Lily stood by the door, her small frame wrapped in an oversized sweater, eyes searching the street the way they always did when she was waiting for him. She saw him, and her face brightened instantly. That simple, unguarded joy that never asked questions first. "Dad," she called out, running toward him, her footsteps light, hopeful. Ethan knelt slightly as she reached him, catching her in a gentle embrace, her warmth grounding him in a way nothing else could. "You walked?" she asked, pulling back just enough to look at him, curiosity replacing excitement. Ethan smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yeah, just felt like it today," he said, calm, easy, as if it were nothing, as if the distance behind him had not cost everything. And for a moment, standing there with his daughter in the quiet of their small street. It almost felt true, but as the evening settled in and the first porch lights flickered on, a black vehicle turned slowly onto the road at the far end, moving with purpose. Its presence quiet but unmistakable, and though Ethan had not yet noticed, something that had begun in silence was already finding its way back to him. "Dad, did something happen?" Lily asked softly as she held his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his like she could feel the difference even if she could not name it. Ethan shook his head gently, offering a quiet smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Nothing we cannot handle," he said, his voice calm, steady, the kind of calm that comes from choosing not to let worry speak out loud. They walked toward the house together, the wooden steps creaking under their weight, the familiar sound grounding in a way words never could. Inside, the air was warm but thin, the hum of an old heater filling the silence. Lily slipped off her shoes and padded toward the kitchen, glancing back once as if checking that he was still there, still solid, still the same. Ethan lingered by the door for a second, his hand brushing the empty space where his keys used to be, a habit he had not yet unlearned. "I made some soup," Lily called out, her voice brightening with a small sense of pride. Ethan stepped into the kitchen and saw the pot on the stove, slightly uneven, a spoon resting against the edge. He smiled, this time more real. "Looks perfect," he said. Even though he knew it was thin, stretched from what little they had left, they sat together at the small table, bowls in front of them, steam rising slowly. And for a moment, everything felt almost normal, almost untouched by what had changed outside these walls. "Did you help someone today?" Lily asked suddenly, her eyes lifting to meet his, not accusing, not worried, just curious in the way only a child can be. Ethan paused, spoon halfway to his mouth, then lowered it gently. "Yeah," he said after a second. "I did." Lily nodded, as if that answered everything, as if kindness did not need explanation. "Mom used to say that matters," she added quietly, her voice softer now. Ethan looked at her, really looked, and something in his chest tightened and eased at the same time. "She was right," he replied, the words carrying more than just agreement. Outside, the evening deepened, shadows stretching longer across the street, porch lights flickering on one by one, and down at the far end, the black vehicle slowed, its engine barely audible, headlights dimmed, observing more than arriving. Inside, Ethan rinsed the bowls, the water running steady, his movements simple, practiced, but his thoughts drifting to the quiet weight of what he had given up. Not regret, never regret, but awareness, the kind that settles in after the decision is already made. A soft knock broke through the stillness, light but deliberate. Lily looked up instantly, eyes wide with curiosity. "Are we expecting someone?" she whispered. Ethan dried his hands slowly, each motion measured, then walked toward the door, his steps calm, unhurried. As if whatever waited on the other side could not rush him, he reached for the handle, paused just long enough to take a breath, and opened it. On the porch stood a man in a dark coat, posture straight, expression composed, not unfriendly but not familiar. Behind him, the black vehicle rested at the curb, silent, patient. "Mr. Cole?" the man asked, his voice respectful, almost careful. Ethan met his gaze, unreadable, steady. "Yes," he replied, and in that quiet exchange, something shifted again, something larger than either of them had spoken aloud yet, the kind of moment where the past does not explain the future, it only prepares you to face it. "I was told to find you, Mr. Cole," the man said calmly, his voice low but precise, the kind of voice that carried authority without needing to raise itself. Ethan stood still in the doorway, one hand resting lightly on the frame, his posture relaxed but alert. "Find me for what?" he asked, not defensive, just direct. The man glanced briefly toward the black vehicle behind him, then back, as if measuring how much to say. "Someone you helped today would like to speak with you," he replied, choosing his words carefully. Inside, Lily hovered near the hallway, watching quietly, her presence small but steady. Ethan noticed her from the corner of his eye, then looked back at the man. "She is okay?" he asked, and for the first time, something softer moved across the man's expression. "She is," he said, a slight nod following. "Because of you." The words settled between them, not heavy, Not dramatic, just honest. Ethan exhaled slowly, not relief exactly, more like confirmation that the choice he had made had landed where it needed to. I am glad, he said simply, and for a moment it seemed like that might be enough, like the conversation could end there. But the man did not leave. He remained still, waiting, respectful but persistent. She would like to thank you in person, he added. Tonight, if possible. Ethan's gaze shifted briefly toward the street, toward the vehicle, then back, his expression unchanged. I do not need thanks, he replied, calm and steady, the kind of answer that does not expect to be challenged. The man inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the sentiment, but not stepping back from his purpose. It is not just thanks, he said after a pause. There are things you should hear. The air between them grew quieter, the kind of quiet that asks for attention, not urgency. Behind Ethan, a small cough broke the stillness. Lily, soft but noticeable, he turned slightly, his eyes meeting hers, and in that brief exchange, something unspoken passed. Not fear, not confusion, just trust, the kind that lets a child wait without needing to understand everything. Ethan looked back at the man. I cannot leave her alone, he said, his voice gentle but firm. The man followed his glance, noticing Lily fully now, his posture softening just enough. You would not have to, he replied. Transportation has been arranged for both of you. Ethan's brow lowered slightly, not in suspicion, but in thought, measuring the offer against everything he knew about the world, about people, about the quiet cost of accepting things that come too easily. A faint breeze moved through the open doorway, carrying the distant hum of the engine outside. Steady, patient, waiting. Ethan looked down for a moment, then back up, his decision forming not in words, but in stillness. We will come, he said finally, not eager, not hesitant, just certain. The man nodded once, stepping back from the door. I will be here, he said, turning toward the vehicle, his movements controlled, deliberate, as if every step had already been planned long before he arrived. Ethan closed the door slowly, the soft click echoing faintly in the quiet house. Lily stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. Who was that? She asked, her voice calm but curious. Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, offering a small, reassuring smile. Someone who wants to talk, he said, and though the words were simple, the weight behind them was not, because somewhere beyond the walls of that small house, something larger had begun to unfold, something that did not rush, did not demand, but moved forward all the same. And for the first time since he let go of his keys, Ethan realized that what he had given up might not be the end of the story, but the beginning of something he could not yet see. The car door closed with a soft, deliberate sound that seemed louder than it should have, sealing Ethan and Lily into a space that felt both unfamiliar and strangely calm. The leather seats were clean. The air inside carried a faint scent of something polished, distant from the worn comfort of their home. Lily sat close to him, her small hand resting against his arm as the vehicle began to move, smooth and quiet, like it had done this 1,000 times before. Where are we going? She asked gently, her voice curious but not afraid. Ethan looked out the window for a moment, watching the familiar streets slip past, then fade into roads he did not often travel. To talk, he said, the same answer as before, but now it carried a different weight, one that even he was still trying to understand. The city lights grew brighter as they moved forward, buildings taller, streets wider, the world shifting from something known to something distant. The driver did not speak, did not turn, just followed a path that had already been decided. And in the quiet between motion and destination, Ethan's thoughts returned to the moment at the clinic, the keys on the counter, the choice that had felt so simple then, so clear, yet now seemed to ripple outward into something larger than he had expected. Lily leaned her head lightly against his shoulder, her breathing steady, trusting. She is the one you helped? She asked after a while. Ethan nodded once. Yes, he said, softly. And for a moment, neither of them spoke again, the silence not empty, but full, like it was holding something just out of reach. The car slowed as it turned into a long driveway, lined with soft lights that stretched ahead like a quiet invitation. The building at the end was not loud or overwhelming, but it carried a presence, clean lines, wide windows, the kind of place where everything seemed to exist with intention. The vehicle came to a gentle stop, and for a second, no one moved, as if the moment needed to settle before it could continue. The door opened, and the man from earlier stood there again, composed, respectful. "We have arrived," he said simply, stepping back to give them space. Ethan stepped out first, then reached back for Lily, helping her down carefully, his hand steady, her grip firm. Together they stood facing the entrance, the soft glow of light spilling out onto the pavement. "Do we go in?" Lily asked quietly, looking up at him. Ethan glanced down at her, then forward again, his expression calm, but his eyes carrying the weight of everything that had led to this point. "Yeah," he said, not as a question, but as a decision. They walked forward, steps measured, the doors opening before them without a sound, and inside, the air felt different, not colder, not warmer, just different, like stepping into a place where things were about to be revealed, not explained. A woman stood at the far end of the room, her posture straight, her presence steady, no longer fragile, no longer uncertain. She turned slowly as they entered, her eyes meeting Ethan's, and in that single moment, the distance between what had happened and what it meant began to close. Not with words, not yet, but with a silence that held recognition, and something deeper that neither of them had spoken before. "You should not have done that," she said softly, her voice no longer fragile but steady, carrying a quiet strength that filled the room without effort. Ethan stood still a few feet away, Lily beside him, her small hand still holding his. The space between them felt measured, intentional, like something that needed to exist before words could follow. "I did what anyone should do," Ethan replied, calm and even, not stepping forward, not stepping back. The woman's eyes held his for a moment. Longer, searching, not questioning, but understanding in a way that did not come from explanation. "No," she said gently, shaking her head once. "Not anyone." The words landed softly, but they carried weight, the kind that did not argue, only revealed. She took a slow step closer, her posture composed, her presence no longer marked by struggle but by control. "My name is Amelia Brooks," she continued, her tone measured, as if each word had been considered before it was spoken. Ethan gave a small nod, acknowledging, but not reacting. Lily glanced up at him briefly, then back at Amelia, her curiosity quiet but alive. "At the clinic, you did not ask who I was," Amelia said, her eyes softening slightly. "You did not ask what I could give you in return." Ethan looked at her, his expression unchanged. "It was not about that," he said simply, and for a moment, the room fell into a silence that felt fuller than any conversation, the kind of silence that carried meaning without needing to fill itself. Amelia exhaled slowly, as if releasing something she had been holding since before they arrived. "That is exactly why you are here," she said, her voice quieter now, more personal. She turned slightly, gesturing toward the space around them. The clean lines, the quiet order, the presence of something larger than what it appeared to be at first glance. "This building, this company, everything connected to it." She paused, then looked back at him. "It is mine." The words did not rise, did not demand attention, but they shifted the air instantly. Lily's eyes widened. Just a little, not fully understanding, but sensing the importance. Ethan remained still, absorbing, not surprised, not impressed, just listening. "I came to that clinic today without anyone knowing," Amelia continued, her voice steady. "No staff, no security, no name that would mean anything." She met his gaze again. "And still, you chose to help." Ethan's shoulders remained relaxed, his posture unchanged. "You needed help," he said, as if that explained everything. And to him, it did. Amelia studied him for a long second, then nodded slightly, not in agreement, but in recognition. "There are people who would have helped if they knew who I was," she said. "But you helped without that." She paused, her voice lowering just enough to carry something deeper. "That matters more than you think." The room seemed to settle around those words, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just clear. Lily shifted slightly beside Ethan, her fingers tightening gently around his hand. "Dad," she whispered, softly, not afraid, just grounding. Ethan gave her hand a small reassuring squeeze, then looked back at Amelia, his voice calm. unchanged. "I did not come here for anything," he said, not as a refusal, but as a statement. Amelia nodded again, slower this time. "I know," she replied. And that was the moment something changed, not in what was said, but in what was understood, because in that quiet exchange, it became clear that what Ethan had given away was not something she could simply return. And what she was about to offer would not be as simple as gratitude, but something far more difficult to measure and far more impossible to ignore. "If you did not come here for anything, then let me ask you something," Amelia said quietly, her eyes steady on Ethan, the room holding its breath again as if waiting for the weight of her next words. "What does your daughter need?" The question did not sound like an offer. It sounded like a truth she was already aware of. Ethan's expression shifted just slightly, not defensive, but careful. "She needs what any child needs," he replied, his voice calm, but slower now, more measured. Lily looked up at him, then at Amelia, sensing something deeper. Beneath the words, Amelia nodded faintly, stepping closer, her attention now moving gently toward Lily. "And what do you need?" she asked softly, her tone different now, less formal, more human. Lily hesitated, her fingers tightening around Ethan's hand. Then she answered in a small, honest voice, "I just want my dad to not worry so much." The simplicity of it settled into the room like a quiet truth no one could argue with. Ethan glanced down at her, something in his eyes softening, then lifted his gaze back to Amelia. "We are doing fine," he said, not as a denial, but as a shield. Amelia held his gaze, not pushing, not challenging, just seeing. "You gave up your only way to get to work," she said gently. "You walked home in the cold, and you told her everything was fine." She paused, her voice steady. "That is not nothing." Ethan did not respond immediately, the silence stretching, not uncomfortable, but real, the kind that carries more than words can. Amelia turned slightly and motioned toward a table nearby, a folder resting neatly on its surface, untouched until now. "I do not want to repay you," she said, her tone precise, "because what you did cannot be priced." She stepped closer to the table, placing her hand lightly on the folder. "But I can offer something that respects it." Ethan watched, still, listening, not moving toward it, not reaching. Lily's eyes followed the motion. Curiosity quiet but present. "This is not charity," Amelia continued, opening the folder slowly, revealing documents inside. "It is an opportunity." Her words were careful, chosen. "A position at my company, transportation provided, stable income, full benefits." She paused briefly, then added, "And medical support for your daughter." The room shifted again, not loudly, but unmistakably. Lily looked up at Ethan, her eyes widening slightly, not fully understanding the details, but feeling the change in the air. Ethan's jaw tightened just a fraction, not from anger, but from something more complex, something like hesitation mixed with pride. "I do not want to owe anyone," he said after a moment, his voice low, steady, the words coming from a place deeper than the situation itself. Amelia nodded slowly, as if she had expected that answer. "Then do not see it as owing," she replied, her voice softer now. "See it as being seen." The words lingered, quiet but powerful, the kind that does not force agreement, but invites reflection. Ethan looked at the folder, then at Lily, then back at Amelia, the space between choice and consequence forming again, familiar now, yet different, because this time, the decision was not about giving something away, it was about accepting something he had never asked for. And as the silence settled once more, it became clear that what stood in front of him was not just an offer, but a moment that could change everything, if he chose to step into it. "Say yes, Dad," Lily whispered softly, not demanding, not pushing, just a quiet hope carried in a small voice. Ethan did not answer right away, his eyes still resting on the folder, the clean lines of the paper, the weight of what it represented pressing into the silence between them. He reached out slowly, not with urgency, but with intention, his fingers brushing the edge before lifting it, the pages inside crisp, precise, filled with terms and structure that belonged to a world far from the one he knew. He scanned a few lines, not fully reading, but feeling the shape of it, the stability, the promise, the cost that was not written in numbers. "This changes things," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. Amelia watched him carefully, not interrupting, not guiding, just allowing the moment to unfold as it needed to. "It gives you options," she replied after a pause, her voice steady, respectful. Ethan let out a slow breath, the kind that comes when a decision is forming but not yet complete. He closed the folder gently, not rejecting it, not accepting it, just holding it between both hands as if weighing more than paper. Lily looked up at him again, her eyes searching, not for answers, but for reassurance. "We could still be us, right?" she asked softly. And that question landed deeper than anything else. Ethan turned toward her fully now, kneeling slightly, so their eyes met at the same level, his voice calm, certain. "We do not change who we are," he said, and for the first time since they entered the building, something settled clearly inside him. He stood again, turning back to Amelia, the folder still in his hands. "If I take this," he said slowly, choosing each word with care, "it is not because I need saving." The room grew quieter. Even the air seemed to pause around his voice. Amelia nodded once, understanding without interruption. "It is because it allows me to take care of her," he continued, his tone steady, grounded. Lily's hand slipping into his again as if sealing the meaning behind his words. Amelia's expression softened, not with relief, but with recognition. "That is the only reason it should be," she said gently. Ethan looked down at the folder one more time, then back at her, the decision no longer forming, but made. "Then I will accept," he said, not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. The kind of acceptance that does not come from pressure, but from purpose. Lily's face brightened slightly, a quiet smile. Forming, not from excitement, but from something deeper, something like hope returning without asking permission. Amelia stepped forward, extending her hand, not as a gesture of power, but of respect. Ethan hesitated for just a second, then took it, his grip firm but calm, the moment simple, yet carrying more meaning than either of them needed to say. "Welcome," she said softly, and though the word was small, it marked the beginning of something neither of them had fully expected. Outside, the night had settled completely, the building lights glowing steady against the dark sky, and somewhere beyond the glass, the world continued as it always had, unaware that inside, a man who had given everything without being seen had just chosen to step into a future where, for the first time in a long time, he might not have to carry it all alone. "Nothing about tomorrow will feel familiar," Amelia said quietly as she walked beside Ethan and Lily through a long glass hallway, her voice calm but certain, like someone who understood the weight of change more than she showed. Ethan glanced at her briefly, then forward again, his expression steady. "Familiar is not always what matters," he replied, not defensive, just honest. Lily walked between them, her small hand still wrapped around his, her eyes moving from the polished floors to the tall windows, taking everything in without fully knowing what it meant yet. The hallway opened into a larger space, quiet but alive with purpose. People moved with intention, voices low, screens glowing softly. The kind of environment where every second seemed to carry value. Ethan slowed slightly, not overwhelmed, but aware of how far this was from the grease-stained garage, from the worn floors of his home, from everything that had defined his days until now. "You will not be alone here," Amelia continued, her tone measured. "There are people who will guide you, train you, make sure you understand everything." She paused, then added, "But what you bring cannot be taught." Ethan looked at her again, this time with a faint shift in his eyes. "And what is that?" he asked. Amelia met his gaze directly. "Clarity," she said simply. "The ability to act without needing recognition." The words settled into the space between them, not exaggerated, not praised, just stated. They stopped near a wide window overlooking the city, lights stretching out into the distance, steady and endless. Lily stepped closer to the glass, her reflection small against the vast view. "It is so big," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Ethan watched her for a moment, then looked out as well, the city unfamiliar, yet somehow connected now to something that had started in a quiet garage with a single choice. "Your position starts immediately," Amelia said, turning slightly toward him. "You will not return to where you were." Ethan nodded. Once, not surprised, but thoughtful. I understand, he said, his voice even. But inside, something shifted, not doubt, but awareness of the distance between who he had been yesterday and who he might become tomorrow. A man approached from across the room, carrying a small device, his posture respectful. Everything is prepared, he said to Amelia, then turned slightly toward Ethan. If you are ready. Ethan glanced at Lily, her eyes meeting his instantly, trusting, steady. He gave a small nod, then looked back at the man. I am, he replied. The man handed him a key card, smooth, simple, yet carrying a different kind of weight than the one he had placed on the clinic counter. Ethan took it, holding it for a second longer than necessary, not because it was new, but because it represented something he had not held in a long time, a path forward that did not require him to give something up first. We will take care of her, Amelia said softly, her attention moving briefly toward Lily. Doctors, specialists, anything she needs. Lily looked between them, her expression quiet, not overwhelmed, just absorbing. Ethan nodded again, slower this time. Thank you, he said, the words simple, but not empty. And as he stood there, in a place that had nothing in common with the life he had known, holding something that symbolized more than access, more than opportunity, it became clear that what had begun as a single act of quiet kindness had now become something else entirely. Something that did not erase where he came from, but asked him to carry it forward into a world that was finally ready to see it. People will treat you differently now, the man guiding Ethan said as they walked through another section of the building. His voice neutral, almost observational. Ethan did not slow his pace, his eyes moving across the unfamiliar environment with quiet focus. They already do, he replied, not with pride, not with discomfort, just with awareness. The man glanced at him briefly, then nodded, as if confirming something he had already suspected. Doors opened automatically as they approached, leading into a workspace where conversations lowered just slightly as Ethan entered, not because of who he was known to be, but because of who they assumed he must be. Lily stayed close, her small steps matching his, her presence grounding him in a way nothing else could. A few people glanced up, curious, measuring, their eyes moving from his worn jacket to the key card in his hand, the contrast silent but noticeable. This is where you will begin, the man said, gesturing toward a desk that seemed already prepared, clean, organized. Waiting, Ethan stepped closer, his fingers brushing lightly across the surface, not claiming it, just acknowledging it. What exactly will I be doing? He asked, his voice steady, the question practical, not uncertain. The man paused for a second, then answered, learning first, observing, understanding how decisions are made here, he added after a moment, and eventually, helping make them. Ethan nodded once, absorbing the weight behind that, not overwhelmed, just aware. Lily looked around, her eyes wide but quiet. It is so quiet here, she said softly. Ethan glanced at her, a faint smile touching his expression. Different kind of noise, he replied, and she nodded, as if that made sense. Across the room, two employees stood near a glass wall, their voices low but not silent. Is that him? One whispered, not realizing how clearly it carried in the stillness. The one she brought in. The other replied, a hint of disbelief in his tone. Ethan did not react, did not turn. He simply stood there, his posture unchanged, but something in the room shifted, not because of what was said, but because of what was not, the absence of any need for him to respond. The man beside him noticed the exchange, his expression tightening slightly, but Ethan lifted a hand just enough to signal it was unnecessary. It is fine, he said quietly, the words not defensive, just complete. The man nodded, stepping back, understanding that this was not something to manage, but something to witness. A moment later, Amelia entered the space, her presence immediately recognized. Conversations faded, attention shifted, not loudly, but completely. She walked toward Ethan without hesitation, her gaze steady. Everything is ready, she said, her voice calm, but carrying authority that did not need to be reinforced. Ethan met her eyes. I will do the work, he replied, simple, direct. Amelia gave a small nod, not approving, but acknowledging. That is all that matters, she said. Lily looked between them, her hand still in his. And for a brief moment, the room felt smaller, quieter, more focused, not on status, not on difference, but on something harder to define, something that did not come from titles or positions, but from choices made when no one was watching. And as Ethan stood there, in a place where every action was seen, measured, and remembered, it became clear that what had begun as a single quiet decision would now be tested in a world that did not understand quiet strength easily, a world that often mistook silence for weakness. And yet, as the room settled around him, no one spoke, no one laughed, no one questioned out loud, because somewhere beneath the surface, something had already begun to shift. And for the first time, the silence was not empty, it was listening. "You will be tested without being told you are being tested," Amelia said quietly as she stood beside Ethan near a glass-walled conference room. Her voice calm, but carrying a deeper meaning than instruction. Ethan did not look at her right away. His gaze remained forward, steady, observing the room where a group of executives sat around a long table, their expressions focused, their conversations measured. "I have been tested before," he replied, his tone even, not defensive, just factual. Amelia turned her head slightly toward him, studying his profile for a brief moment. "Not like this," she said softly. Inside the room, a discussion was unfolding, numbers displayed across a large screen, projections, risks, decisions that affected people Ethan would never meet. One of the executives spoke with certainty, outlining a plan that would reduce costs, streamline operations, improve margins. The others nodded, some hesitant, some convinced. The language was precise, but something beneath it felt incomplete. Ethan stepped closer to the glass, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in confusion, but in focus. Lily stood just behind him, her small presence quiet, watching her father more than the room. "What do you see?" Amelia asked, her voice low, almost blending into the hum of the building. Ethan took a second before answering, not rushing, not guessing. "They are solving numbers," he said, his eyes still fixed on the screen, "but not people." The words were simple, but they shifted something. Amelia's expression did not change, but her attention sharpened. "Explain," she said. Ethan exhaled slowly, the same steady rhythm that had guided him before. "Cutting costs looks clean on paper," he continued, "but someone loses hours, someone loses stability, someone goes home and tells their kid things are fine when they are not." The room beyond the glass continued its conversation, unaware that outside, a different perspective was forming, one not built from spreadsheets, but from lived reality. Amelia watched him closely now, not evaluating, but listening in a way that few people ever had. "And what would you do?" she asked, not challenging, just inviting. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, his voice remaining calm. "Find a way to keep the people and still fix the problem," he said. "It takes longer, it is harder, but it does not break anything that cannot be repaired." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the difference between efficiency and responsibility. Inside the room, a decision was nearing, voices aligning, conclusions forming. Amelia reached for the door handle, then paused, her eyes still on Ethan. "Would you say that in there?" she asked quietly. Ethan did not hesitate. "If you want the truth, yes," he said. And that was all. Amelia opened the door, the conversation inside slowing as attention shifted, not abruptly, but inevitably, the presence of something new entering the space. Ethan stepped forward, not with authority, not with hesitation, just with clarity. Lily remained just behind the threshold, watching, silent, as the room that once felt distant now became something her father was about to stand inside, not as a visitor, but as someone whose voice would carry weight, not because of where he stood, but because of what he understood. And as the last words of the meeting faded into quiet anticipation, something changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably, because for the first time, the room was not waiting for the smartest answer, it was waiting for the most honest one. "You are saying we should risk efficiency for people?" one of the executives asked, his tone controlled but edged with disbelief. Ethan stood at the end of the table, not rushing, not retreating, his hands resting lightly against the back of a chair. "I am saying if you remove the people, you remove the reason the company exists," he replied calmly. The room shifted, not loudly, but enough A few glances exchanged. A few brows tightening. Another voice followed, sharper this time. That is not how business works. Ethan looked at him, not challenging, just steady. That is exactly how it works, he said. You just do not see it because you are not the one going home explaining it. Silence pressed in, heavier now, not from confusion, but from recognition that something real had just entered the conversation. One of the senior members leaned back slightly, studying Ethan with a different kind of attention. And your solution? He asked, not dismissive, but curious. Ethan did not move. His voice remained even. Adjust the structure, not the people, he said. Reduce waste where it does not break lives. Invest where it keeps them stable. It takes longer, but it lasts. The words did not rise, they settled. And that was the difference. They did not demand agreement. They invited it. Amelia stood near the head of the table, her expression composed, her eyes moving from Ethan to the others, watching the shift unfold, not forcing it, just allowing it to be seen, one by one. The resistance softened, not completely, not instantly, but enough for the room to change direction. The conversation that followed was quieter, more careful, less about proving and more about understanding. Lily watched from the doorway, her small figure still, her eyes fixed on her father, not fully understanding the words, but understanding something deeper, something about how he stood, how he spoke, how he did not need to raise his voice to be heard. The meeting ended without applause, without announcement, just a quiet agreement to reconsider, to adjust, to rethink what had once seemed obvious. The executives stood, some nodding slightly toward Ethan, not fully accepting, but no longer dismissing. The room emptied slowly, leaving behind a silence that felt different from before, fuller, grounded. Ethan stepped back, his posture unchanged. As if nothing extraordinary had happened, Amelia approached him, her steps measured, her gaze steady. You did not try to impress them, she said softly. Ethan shook his head once. I just told the truth, he replied. Simple, complete. Amelia held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. That is why it worked, she said. Ethan turned toward the doorway where Lily stood, her face calm, a small smile forming as he approached. She reached for his hand without hesitation. You were not worried, she said softly. Ethan looked down at her, then back at the now empty room. No, he answered. Because I was not trying to win. He paused, then added. I was trying to keep things from breaking. Lily nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Outside the glass walls, the city lights stretched endlessly, steady, unchanged, but inside, something had shifted in a way that would not easily return to what it was, because in a place built on numbers and outcomes, one man had reminded them of something quieter, something harder to measure, something that did not need recognition to exist. And as the room settled into silence once more, it was no longer the silence of doubt or dismissal. It was the silence of understanding, the kind that comes when truth does not need to be repeated, only remembered.